This is Steve Saltwick. Welcome to Your Brain, a Personal Tour, Seminar 4. Today we talk about the neurogenesis of human culture with a focus on primate foundations. We'll talk about the path that Mother Nature took to evolve the human brain from our nearest evolutionary ancestors. That's a complex path, spanning fruit trees to the chanting of Buddha phrases. 3 major milestones stand out. First, the evolution of your brain amazingly depended on the ability of primates to efficiently forage for fruit in trees. That's an amazing capability, but it also sets the stage for compulsive gambling. Second, the evolution of your brain depended on the ability of our primate ancestors to forge concepts like ripe fruit. That's a beneficial capability, but it also sets the stage for tragic human disorders. For example, where one loved one cannot recognize the face of another. And third, the evolution of your brain depended on advanced social cognition, our ability to cope with the social aspects of our environment. That's an advantageous capability, but it also sets the stage for autism spectrum disorders. Our brains could not have evolved without these 3 fundamental capabilities. So as the subtitle states, chanting Nembutsu, the Buddha phrase, would not be possible before our ancestors learned to eat fruit in a tree. Welcome to the seminar. I hope you enjoy it. We begin with a sculpture, which embodies a stereotype. This sculpture was carved in the 13th century to commemorate the itinerant priest Kuya. Kuya lived in the 10th century and innovated a 6-syllable chant about the Buddha called Nembutsu. The 6 syllables of the phrase are represented by the little Buddhas coming out of Kuya's mouth. Repeating Nembutsu was thought to build merit and help you in reincarnation. So think about that. The statue, the workmanship, the philosophy of the phrase, and its meaning. Could one of our primate ancestors conceived and made such a thing? I think not. However, appreciating this outstanding work of art is not the same as stereotypical thought that animals in general, and primates in particular, do not advance skills. The hubris of this stereotype has been exposed by recent research. Let's take a look at that. But first, I want to note that I've added 2 new books to the suggested reading list. Both are highly recommended. The first is by a well-known researcher and poses significant questions on understanding animal behavior and culture. The second is a brilliant application of evolutionary science onto human psychology. Statements about unique human capabilities usually center around a few main themes. The first is that animals don't have the necessary brain circuits to recognize tools and use them as extensions of their body. Or maybe a few animals can use tools, but only the animals with big brains. Another theme is that animals have no cultural transmission system. They don't have kindergartens or schools. They have no way of indoctrinating the next generation into the skills of the current. Probably most prevalent is that animals have no real use of language. Animal research has shown that all these themes are false. Animals clearly do have the capabilities to do these kinds of things, and they often do so in the wild. Let's take a look at a few examples. Here, a troop of chimpanzees in Africa use pliable limbs taken from trees to poke and then withdraw termites from mounds. Termites are a delectable source of protein for chimpanzee, and the chimps are quite adept at using these tools. But chimpanzees are not the only species capable of using such tools. Let's go to the ocean. This porpoise is using a sponge to protect its nose. Porpoises delight in finding fish at the bottom of oceans in crevices, but they have very sensitive noses. So they'll pull a sponge off the bottom and then cover their noses as they search for fish. Well, okay, some will say maybe big-brained animals like chimps and porpoises might have some advanced skills. But let's go to an animal that has a bird brain. I mean, a real bird brain, the crow. Crows and ravens have tiny brains, but boy, are they smart. This dude is a member of a murder of crows in Japan that roost above pedestrian crossings. They drop nuts into traffic and then swoop down to eat the cracked nut, but only when the crossing light has stopped traffic. This dude has a PhD in nut cracking, and you'll see him walk across the crosswalk now, given that traffic has stopped. Finally, let's take a look at a cultural transmission system. Meerkats are not just cute, they operate kindergartens. This mother meerkat is incapacitating a scorpion in order for her young pup to complete his scorpion eating lesson. The mother meerkat will assay the level of expertise of the pup and then increasingly allow the scorpion to have more and more function as the pup learns to handle it. At first, the mother will completely bite off the stinger, and then she'll partially disable it. And then finally, on graduation solo, the pup will face a completely alive and awake scorpion. Now, about that language. I'd like to introduce a famous speaker of language, Alex the parrot. Alex was not only a good speaker, he could plead. Upon being dropped off at a veterinarian's office, Alex said, "Come back. I love you. I'm sorry, I want to go back." Alex was trained for 30 years by Dr. Irene Pepperberg. She used a model rival training routine. In this routine, Alex observed Irene and a human assistant modeling a behavior. He would get attention from Irene by imitating the desired behavior. Alex started verbally correcting miscommunications between the two humans, and voila, a famous parrot was discovered. Alex could name 50 different objects, recognize quantities up to 6, distinguish 7 colors and 5 shapes. Alex understood the concepts of bigger and smaller, same and different. He had the intelligence of a 5-year-old and the emotional level of a 2-year-old, which showed in his pleading behavior. He was famous enough to be accorded an obituary in The Economist, and you don't get more famous than that. He clearly was an outstanding example of how an animal can use language. Note that gray parrots do not speak like this in the wild. Alex was trained for 30 years, so we have to remember that even though the capability of language may be in some animals' brains, the actual demonstration of the behavior may not appear in the wild. And then there are other behaviors that do not appear in the wild. For example, at Northwestern University, researchers introduced parrots to smartphones and found that they love to call and chat with their friends. Isn't that nice? But on the other side of the coin, parrots in the British Zoo forged a clique of trash-talking parrots and were so upsetting to visitors that they had to be separated from the public. Now, a few observations. Monkeys are very smart, but they have been in the Stone Age for over 3,000 years. Why? I mean, they just don't seem to be able to move on. And also, don't get the ideas that monkeys, especially chimpanzees, are cute and playful. Chimps murder one another. They hunt with spears. They mercilessly decimate populations. One well-documented case of a troop of chimpanzees showed them spear hunting a troop of colobus monkeys to near extinction. But with all these capabilities, with all due respect, animals can't and don't do Nembutsu. For all the awesome capabilities, we've never found an instance of an animal creating a statue like Kuya. No concert has been conceived by an animal to rival Bach. No painting to rival Da Vinci. There really is something unique that happens in the evolution of a human brain, and the foundations of that uniqueness are what we're going to investigate next. This is a video of the key milestones in the evolution of the human brain, and I want to highlight a specific change that is believed to be essential in the evolution of your brain. But let's start at the beginning of life, and then roll to the emergence of non-human primates. Did you notice a change in scenery just at the end of the video? I mean, look at the ending picture. Our ancestors went into the trees. They began to exploit the forest canopy. Now, birds had done that before, but the change from land-based to forest canopy-based living was fundamental to the ways your brain evolved. So let's take a look at that in some different ways. The behaviors necessary to exploit this new niche were significantly different than those of the ancestors of primates. I mean, let's take a look at rats, focusing on eating behavior. How does a rat eat? Well, here's a video of a rat consuming a bit of food. Notice how the food is consumed. His paws grab the piece of food on the ground, lifts it to his mouth, and then chews. Straightforward, but boring. Now let's take a look at a primate in the forest canopy, doing what is termed a pole vault. In this environment, there is no stable earth. The animal is perched on a branch, which then moves relative to the food he's attempting to consume. There's complex spatial relationships in the three-dimensional arrangement of objects, other animals, fruit, and branches. It's quite a challenge to consume food in these environments, even once you've found it. The capabilities underpinned by these expanded areas of the brain allowed primates to exploit this wonderful new niche and set the stage for the evolution of human culture. Here we map the evolution of the macaque monkey brain into a human brain. The more yellowish the color in this diagram, the more the brain is expanded. Some areas grow by a factor of 32. Two areas we'll talk about today are the prefrontal cortex, and that's in front of your brain as shown in this diagram, and the inferotemporal cortex, that's on the side of your brain by your ears. The prefrontal cortex is really what sets your brain apart from its ancestors. The diagram on the right maps the percentage of your brain, represented by the prefrontal cortex, relative to the total surface of your frontal lobe. The human brain is off the chart. This part of your brain, and to some extent all the yellow areas shown on the right, are essential in the evolution of human culture. But what? What is so special about the expanded part of the primate brain? Do these areas underpin a host of new mental capabilities, or do they represent just a few fundamental new skills? And if just a few skills, how does that set the stage for human culture? Well, in my opinion, these areas represent only two fundamental new ecological skills which allow the exploitation of one new ecological niche, the forest canopy. We said the exploitation of this new ecological niche required several different kinds of capabilities. Thousands of pages have been written about what those capabilities entail, but I think the best way to summarize them simply is to say that those expanded areas of the brain provided skills to 1, efficiently forage, and 2, to form more effective social groups. This picture tells it all. Here's a troop of macaques in the middle of a tropical forest about to go forage for food. Foraging is no walk in the park. A monkey's troop home range may have something on the order of 100,000 trees. 4% of those trees may be ripe at any one particular time. The fruit in such a range is highly clustered. 60% may be in one site, which might be one or a few number of trees, 0% in others. Two fruits could look the same, but one could be toxic and the other could have great protein benefit. Foraging is also done in daylight, so it can be dangerous. Foragers are exposed to predators, and they compete with other primate groups. Chimpanzees are renowned for eating other monkeys, so one better be careful of which trees to visit and must be aware of who is in those trees. There's a complex relationship to home group size. The larger the group, the better the search. However, large groups are more expensive compared to a smaller group where there would be less internal competition and more food available for any one particular monkey. The expanded parts of the primate brain had a lot to deal with. Foraging, in my opinion, can be broken down into 4 essential capabilities. Recall that the distribution of fruit in a typical home range is very patchy. Different kinds of fruit ripen at different times. Different kinds of fruit have differential protein benefit. A monkey troop beginning its daily foraging walk must evaluate several kinds of future outcomes, and that is one of the capabilities of the expanded area in the brain. If you look at the next picture on the right, you'll see 2 different kinds of fruit. These fruit look completely different. They taste completely different, but they have one thing in common: they ripen at the same time. A monkey troop encountering one of these fruits will immediately expand its search to look for fruits of both types. That means their brains have mastered the abstract category of ripe fruit. The next picture shows the path of a foraging group as it approaches a good tree. When the monkeys forage, they tend to focus on particular trees. They'll bypass some trees with fruit to get to the preferred source of fruit. That means their brain areas are capable of focusing attention on a future goal several steps away. And then finally, monkeys, when they find a good tree, will exploit the fruit on that tree for only a certain period of time. So they have a strategy to deal with a successful encounter in a fruit tree. However, monkeys must also have strategies to deal with the unexpected arrival of an aggressive competitor. The expanded areas of the brain have the capability of supporting such behavior, sticking with exploiting the fruit on a tree for a certain amount of time, then shifting to a different tree. Can we find cells in the brains of those monkeys, that map to the behaviors that we see here as foraging behaviors? The answer is yes, we can. Let's start with strategies. When a monkey finds a fruit-laden tree, the strategy that's typically expressed is the behavior to look for other trees with the same type of fruit. This is called a strategy of sticking with the current behavior. Keep on searching for the same type of fruit. However, if something unexpected happens, like an aggressive monkey troop searching for the same type of fruit, a monkey will shift their behavior and look for a different kind of fruit. Can we find neurons in the brains that do that? Yes. Here are records of neurons in the primate brain that reflect a strategy of staying with the current behavior or shifting to some other kind of behavior. The recordings are from the front part of the brain, right? The middle one is a stay strategy neuron. This neuron indicates that the monkey will repeat the behavior that was successful in the past. The shift neurons are showed on either side. Shift strategy neurons indicate that the monkey will do a behavior other than the behavior in the past. These kind of cells directly underpin the kind of behaviors we see in foraging, and they're a clear indication that this part of the brain can deal with higher order concepts like strategy, staying with a working behavior, or shifting to some other kind of alternate behavior. To see the functioning of this part of the brain in human behavior, it's instructive to observe what happens when this part of the brain is damaged by stroke or by the removal of cortex to treat epileptic seizures. Gambling is a behavior that shows dramatic effects when these areas are damaged. And there's a standard way to study gambling. It's called the Iowa Gambling Task. Subjects are presented with 4 decks. 2 of the decks, will say B and D, have high payouts, but they pay out very infrequently, and 2 other decks, A and C, pay out less, but they pay out fairly consistently. Winnings over time will be much better with decks A and C compared to decks B and D. Subjects with no brain damage gravitate over time to the A and C decks. However, if this part of the brain is damaged, we see 2 behaviors develop. The first behavior is persistence in a losing strategy. Even though the subject reports knowing that B and D pay out, infrequently, they will not shift to use the other decks. They're stuck in a losing strategy. In essence, they don't have the capability to shift when conditions warrant. The second behavior is a sudden abandonment of a winning strategy, playing decks A and C. People with damage in the prefrontal cortex should not be allowed to get close to gambling tasks. They have a distinct challenge to orienting their behavior based on future or predicted outcomes. Another foraging behavior is the valuation of future outcomes. When a monkey finds a good tree with fruit on it, the natural inclination is to pig out on that tree. However, since fruit is distributed in a patchy manner, fruits vary in protein benefit, competitor may be closing in, etc. There's a value to switching from that particular tree to another tree at a certain point. That's shown in the diagram on the right. As the monkey is exploiting a tree, there's a declining value of staying there and a rising value of switching. A kind of economic analysis goes on in terms of driving behavior. It turns out we can find cells in the prefrontal cortex whose activity exactly mimic this kind of observed behavior. There's an area in the prefrontal cortex that increases its activity over time that drives a switching strategy. Notice that this is driving behavior away from the expression of the current behavior. It's overriding an inclination to stick with a natural behavior of eating food right in front of your face. That kind of override is the sign of an advanced brain. Primate brains are very good at this kind of economic analysis in a wide variety of settings. A good example comes from the island of Bali in Indonesia. Local primates there have the equivalent skills to the Sopranos or the Corleones. In other words, great skills in robbery, barter, and extortion. The monkeys hang out at famous temples, and when tourists come to see the temples, the monkeys approach in a surreptitious fashion. They then steal a personal item. In priority order, cell phone, then sunglasses, then hat, and they scamper away. Later, they will trade the personal item for food at a rate that correlates to the value of the personal item. Cell phones get the most, hats the least. So this part of your brain is very, very smart. This aspect of your brain can also lead to a bias called the IKEA effect. In essence, how we overvalue our work compared to others. That chest of drawers you frustratingly built from a flat pack, you will overvalue it compared to a store-bought item by 63%. If you fold an origami swan, you will value it 500% over a store-bought one. And work hard on thinking through a problem, you value your solution as much as Einstein's because you work so hard on it. This effect biases your everyday views. This aspect of the primate brain helps us understand some irrational beliefs. In humans, this area of the brain focuses on the economic analysis of only a subset of the available information. Therefore, it's biased. The bias is termed an availability bias, and its operation is called the availability heuristic. In essence, this bias leads your brain to believe that the probability of an event is roughly equal to the ease with which you can recall it. 80% of the time, that's a good way to estimate probability. But when the events of your life are not reflective of the overall information in the system, you get a bad result. Let's take the news. If you keep up with the news, then it's probably mostly negative, because if it bleeds, it leads. So negative news is easy to remember and recall, but that's not what's happening in the world, is ably set forth in these two books. The world overall is getting better, but the availability bias of our brain, conditioned by the focus of the news on the negative, leads us to believe the world is going to heck. Be aware of this when you consume the news. Your outlook on life will be much more positive if you do. Let's look at the third aspect of foraging behavior. This one is focused attention to a goal several steps away. If you look at the foraging pattern shown on the left, you'll see that the monkey troop goes under a tree, then to the left of a fruit-bearing tree, under another tree, then towards the right, and then they get to the target tree. So there's a particular sequence of behaviors that must be executed to get to the good tree. Can we find cells in the monkey prefrontal cortex that show such sequential behavior? Absolutely, positively, yes. In a series of experiments, a monkey must perform a sequence of tasks: pulling, pushing, or turning a handle. Different monkeys were trained to execute different sequences of tasks to get reward. Some alternated movements, some paired movements, and some had 4 repeat sequences. There were single cells that predicted the successful execution of those kinds of sequential behaviors in the monkey cortex. So we find a rich complement of cells in the prefrontal cortex that drive sequences of behavior, not associated with any particular response, but associated with the sequence of behavior. This is a significant fact in the organization of monkey and human behavior. What are the effects of damage from stroke or surgical removal of this area in humans? Well, we studied this task by constructing a task that is highly dependent upon a sequence of actions. The task shown on the slide is called the Towers of London. There's a similar one called the Towers of Hanoi with circular discs, but this one will suit our purposes quite nicely. The subject is shown in an initial configuration of balls on posts, and the task at hand is to produce the target configuration. A solution to the puzzle A would be to move the red ball from the shortest pole to the longest pole, and then move the blue ball to the shortest pole. I'll leave it to you to figure out option B. People with damage in this brain are hopeless at such sequential tasks. They flounder about. They get halfway along a successful sequence, and then they abandon it. People with damage in this area of the brain often can't let themselves into their own house. They know they need to get the keys. They know they need the keys, to unlock the door. They know that the door will open if it's unlocked, but they can't get the sequence of behaviors down. It creates a very frustrating environment for the human and is highly sensitive to sequential changes. So once the sequence is learned by using other cues, if anything changes, the whole thing falls apart. The last capability underpinning foraging is the ability to learn abstract categories. We saw that monkeys displayed knowledge of the category of ripe fruit. When they find either one of the fruits shown on the left, they will simultaneously alter their search pattern to incorporate both fruit. How do we study that in the lab? Well, we train monkeys to distinguish between sets of stimuli. In this example, if the monkey has responded to any of the images shown under A1 through A4, the monkey will be rewarded with juice. The B stimuli are not rewarded. The monkey reaches a very high level of performance rapidly. They get it quickly. Then we do a nasty trick. We reverse the meaning of the stimuli. B now means reward, and A is not rewarded. When this happens, a monkey will have to make a mistake to discover that B means reward now, and A is not rewarded. The meanings have changed. But look at what happens. Performance returns to virtually 100% on the next trial. The monkey has switched the meaning of all images in each category and behaves accordingly. This is very different from non-primates. A rabbit, for example, will only slowly recover performance in this kind of task. Building categories is a complex behavior for the primate brain. We'll need to focus on two areas to explain this phenomenon: the prefrontal cortex and the inferotemporal cortex. Categories seem to be stored in the inferotemporal cortex under the direction of the prefrontal cortex. We know that because if we separate the connection between the two, old categories are retained, but new categories are not built. I want to draw your attention to another aspect of categories as shown in this slide, and that is categories are stored separately depending upon one particular dimension: faces. The primate brain is highly sensitive to faces. Faces are subjected to quite a sophisticated analysis. Shown here are recordings from the inferotemporal cortex as we present various faces to the subject monkey. All cells react strongly initially to faces, but then they show that they're highly tuned to a specific configuration of facial features. Some cells are highly sensitive to threat-like displays. Those are the open mouth with barred teeth. Others to neutral faces. These two expanded areas of the brain represent an advanced capability of the primate brain. It takes two areas working in concert to build categories: the prefrontal cortex to drive the process, the inferotemporal cortex to store the categories. The categories represented by the inferior temporal cortex can be quite complex. We can see that from looking at the results of damage to this area in humans. When this area is damaged, the resulting condition is called agnosia. Agnosia is different from memory loss. In memory loss, the category memory is irretrievable, regardless of sensory modality. For example, the gentleman looking at a set of keys does not know or cannot respond with what they are. Even when he picks them up, he still doesn't know or respond with what they are. However, the woman suffering from agnosia recognizes the keys upon picking them up. She would also know how to use them. She can do this using some sense modality other than vision. This could be a great benefit to those with agnosia. For example, when someone cannot recognize the face of a loved one. While the subject visually may not recognize the face, the experience of smelling a particular cologne or watching the subject walk or gesture can bring back the memory of that person. However, this also means that the condition can be hard to detect. In other words, other senses can compensate for the presence of agnosia. It's a good time to bring Homer back, and Homer is concerned. He thinks he has to climb up a tree and eat fruit to be human. Well, not exactly. But the insight that foraging underpins some of the most dramatic evolution of the brain gives us a new understanding of brain function. Since humans and monkeys share these areas, research can be accelerated, and that's a good thing. And our knowledge of these areas is expanding rapidly, and that leads to better recovery from trauma. Let's turn our attention now to the other impact of the expanded capabilities in the primate brain, social cognition. Social cognition is gaining benefit by watching, interacting, and or imitating members of your own or other species. It's a widespread behavior in animals. However, this capability reaches its peak in primates and humans. It dramatically helps in foraging, as we've just seen. It's also very impactful in better defense against predation. Here's a troop of baboons driving off a wayward leopard, and this is enabled by social cognition. However, social cognition in primates has its trade-offs. In fact, it's attained the level of soap operas. Time will not permit us to look at all the aspects of social cognition, but we can hit upon some highlights of its development in a couple of quintessential capabilities. Social cognition seems to develop in three overall phases. Unsurprisingly, in the first phase, it's mother knows best. Infants benefit substantially from observing and imitating dear old mom. In the example on the slide, an infant is learning that mom knows what food to eat and what to avoid. The second phase represents juveniles learning from the best dude of the troop. Here, a young monkey is learning how to crack nuts from the best nutcracker in the home troop. These experiences seem to introduce the category of us to the young monkey. The home troop is an in-group or troop to which the monkey belongs. In most monkey troops, when males reach adulthood, they migrate to a new troop. This migration helps minimize inbreeding and its deleterious effects. So the third phase of social learning is easiest to see in migrated adult males, but is present in all adults. In this phase, conformity to group norms seem to dominate. The slide shows an example of this. An adult male who is a juvenile learned that his home troop consumed blue corn, rapidly switches to the preferred corn color of his new troop, red corn. We'll study the implications of this in a later seminar. For now, I want to focus on a particular behavior clearly shown to underpin such social learning. Imitation. It's a widespread behavior in animals. However, this capability reaches its peak in primates and humans. If you don't believe me, just take a look at the two gorillas in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They have learned to imitate the pose of rangers when the rangers pose for selfies. In this section, We'll look at the fundamental aspects of imitation, and by looking at those fundamentals, we can increase our understanding of our brain and its underpinnings of human society. Imitation consists of three essential capabilities. The first is to determine what to imitate. The world of a primate is a target-rich environment. What in that environment should be chosen to imitate? The second is to determine how to imitate. What are the muscle movements or motor programs that need to be executed in order to imitate a given behavior? What about the intention of that behavior? And the third is to get rewarded for imitating. There must be a reinforcer here, either the direct consummation of a reward or the avoidance of danger. Sometimes simply looking at something is rewarding in and of itself. The macaque in a hot bath of Japan shouldn't be looking at his mobile phone, but clearly he finds this a rewarding experience. What could he be looking at? There's a clear prioritization of objects that your brain analyzes when determining what to imitate. The clear winner of that prioritization scheme is faces. Your brain analyzes faces mapped to the dimensions shown above and below the sample face. So when one of the first things your brain does is analyzing objects in the environment is to determine what object is a face, and after that, what are the specifics of that face per these dimensions. Much of the same dimensions underpin the Face ID systems in your phone. However, our brain analyzes faces not only for Face ID dimensions, but also emotional state. Once your brain has determined that an object has a face, it will subject the object to further analysis. The essential question here is it attached to something that is alive? What? How does your brain determine something is alive? Well, it evaluates the object on the dimension of biological motion. Biological motion is far easier to show than describe, so let's take a set of lights and have them move a certain way. Your brain is hardwired to interpret the movement of these lights as an individual walking. If we look at different patterns of light, we can see the dudes doing a little dance. Your brain will infer emotional states and even gender from such a pattern of movement. We find brain cells that are highly attuned to biological motion. They react to movement of lights that represent joint movements, not random movement. That is one way that your brain determines that something is alive and potentially worth imitating. The existence of brain cells that determine it's alive for objects could be used to explain a very surprising encounter people have on safaris in Africa. Here's an example from one Becky and I took. We were amazed at how close animals got under the vehicles. Let me show you a quick example. That leopard walked right under the feet of the tracker on the front of the Jeep. I believe it was because the leopard did not detect biological motion of the Jeep. We were a big rock or something like that. Given that we were a rock, okay to walk close by it, because the leopard did not detect any biological motion of limbs from the Jeep. Further proof of this theory was given when someone stood up in the Jeep and moved their limb. A close-by lion really noticed. Needless to say, they sat down quickly and quietly. The part of your brain that subjects objects to analysis and looks for special aspects of faces is the inferotemporal cortex, shown within the red circle. Some people call this area of the brain the object analyzer. It breaks down objects into various categories where faces and alive things are special categories. This part of the brain then represents that information to other parts of the brain. Other people call this area of the brain the what system. It's basically the part of your brain that subjects objects to analysis, forms categories about those objects, and then provides that analysis to other parts of your brain. The prefrontal cortex, for example, uses this analysis for strategy selection and valuation. This is an extremely important part of your brain overall, and it's absolutely essential in terms of evaluating who to imitate. Once the primate brain has determined a who to imitate, it will proceed to determine how to imitate. The simplest way for a primate brain to determine how to imitate is to follow the gaze of an alive face. Your brain does this so quickly, the assumption is that it does so reflexively. So your brain is wired to analyze 1. Objects that are alive faces, 2. Determine the direction of gaze of that face, and 3. Follow that direction of gaze. After that, your brain then subjects any movement observed to intention analysis. Let's look at that next. This kind of analysis is performed by mirror cells. We saw them in Seminar 1. To briefly review their function, mirror cells encode the goal of a motor act. Look at the quadrants of this figure. We see brain recording histograms of a single mirror cell below a cartoon figure representing a movement. Sections 1 and 3 show that this particular mirror cell encodes grasping to eat. It fires when the monkey observes a human grasping a food object and bringing it to her mouth, as well as when the monkey grabs a food object and brings it to its own mouth. Sections 2 and 4 show that the mirror cell does not react to grabbing motions, either performed or observed. I want to stress that the analysis here is on the motor goal, bringing food to mouth, and not the internal state of the person or animal observed, hungry or not. The mirror cell attempts to drive execution of a motor object, not to understand the motivations of the observed. This will be an important point in our next lecture on human unique brain capabilities. Having found the who to imitate, and then analyzing how to imitate, and then actually doing the motor object of who was doing the doing, do we get rewarded? Yes. Not only can performing the motor object get us a reinforcer, just looking can be reinforcing. In essence, your brain is enjoying the view. Here we show not just monkey faces, but other parts of a monkey, and we can get some very interesting results. Viewing pictures of a subordinate monkey is unpleasant. Looking at a gray square is neutral. But if we use a picture of a dominant monkey's face, we find looking at it is rewarding. And then finally, the most rewarding view is that of the hindquarters of a female monkey. I will note that the subjects were both male, and I'll leave it at that. It's time for Homer to weigh in on a summary set of observations. The first thing Homer would like to say is, wow, I had no idea that the brain was so into faces and gaze. Facial analysis, determination of what's alive, and using the target gauge to set the stage for imitation are fundamental activities that your brain in everyday life uses in the creation of culture. When those circuits go awry, they result in social complications like autism spectrum disorder and many others. The second observation from Homer is that monkey see, monkey do is kind of a positive statement. Imitation is a fundamental tool of teaching pedagogy and cultural transmission. Imitation is not unique to primates. Remember Meerkat Kindergarten? Primates, however, take the fundamentals of imitation, facial and gaze analysis, to a new level of sophistication, and that helps set the stage for the unique aspects of human culture. In our last section, we'll look a bit more deeply at areas of the brain underlying social cognition in primates. Your brain has the same expanded as well as new areas of social cognition. Let's cover the non-human primate ones today. It turns out there's an extensive area in the primate brain devoted to this kind of cognition. It is not active with objects or agents. It is not active with just one agent doing something. It is exclusively active with social interactions. Sequences of events relating to two agents doing something. Now, these results are very recent and important. It's as if the brain is forming a social object. Recall how in Seminar 1 we saw the perceptual system building complex objects like Jennifer Aniston or Ryan Gosling or Homer Simpson. Well, this might be a similar process, but built on social interaction, a far more set of complex stimuli. Non-human primates are not social nitwits. They, as a species, display an admirable range of exemplary social behavior. For example, altruism and fairness. Let's take one example from marmosets. The cute little dude shown here on the left. Marmosets are cooperative breeders, and by that I mean infants receive care not just from their parents, but from other helpers in the group. This is different from chimpanzees and other apes. But they are not alone in the animal world. Meerkats, magpies, wolves, and foxes are known to be cooperative breeders. Now, in several experiments, marmosets can be shown to be altruistic. They will work to give food to another hungry member of the group, whether they are related or paired. This is an advanced behavior, and the social circuits of the brain make this possible. Non-human primates not only can display altruism, but they also have a keen sense of fairness, which springs from these circuits. The best way to show you this is with a video. Here, the renowned researcher Franz de Waal, author of the book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?, describes and demonstrates a very famous experiment.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food than you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
I hope these videos give you some insight into just how complex the social capabilities of primates are. There's one more behavior I want to present: cooperation. Here you see a picture of an experiment where 3 chimpanzees had to cooperate to receive a reward. They had to work together, or it didn't work. Sometimes all 3 had to work, sometimes 2 of the 3 could accomplish the task. There were some very surprising results. First, maximum cooperation required punishment. Initially, most chimps tend to cooperate, but without punishment, cooperation declined over time. The punishment addressed freeloaders, chimps that didn't work but received a reward. Once a chimp became known as a freeloader, chimps would avoid them if possible. If the freeloader could not be avoided, the other chimps would purposefully not work so that nobody received a reward. This is called altruistic punishment. And strange as it may seem, such behavior is widely expressed in living creatures. Plants have been shown to punish bacteria. Fish have been shown to punish cleaner fish who do not do their work. But on the positive side, as long as punishment is in the system, at the end of the day, when the behavior has reached steady state, cooperation is 5 times greater than competition. That's a positive statement about the primate brain and your brain. Time for Homer. Homer says 2 things. The first is, seems to me that a primate brain is pretty smart and social. Here Homer is talking about non-human primates. Many of the skills and capabilities that we might think are human unique are present in our evolutionary ancestors. Now, those capabilities may or may not be typical as shown in the wild, but they're readily apparent in the laboratory. That means non-human primate brains had capabilities foreshadowing human capabilities. The human species evolved with inherited capabilities, perhaps not readily apparent from primate ancestors, but which could be rapidly used once certain triggering events occurred. We'll see the impact of this next time. The second of Homer's point is you've got to be careful with the interpretations of complex skills. It's very, very common for humans to ascribe intentions to acts they observe. An animal may just be imitating an act with little intention other than just enjoying the view. We need to be careful on this and not use one of our unique human skills to cloud our observations of animal behavior. In other words, your dog or your cat does not think like you. Before we close, let's look at what happened in our evolutionary path after our primate ancestors entered into the forest canopy. Note the characteristics of the landscape when humanoids first appeared. Did you see it? It was the emergence of the savanna, the extensive grasslands of Africa. Tectonic activity along the Rift Valley raised a portion of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania to an elevated plateau. Our ancestors were now in grassland. The forest had left them. The fruits, berries, and leaf buds our easygoing non-human primate ancestors had consumed were no longer available. We had to adapt. In other words, humans did not leave the forest left what would ultimately become humans. What did that do to our brains? Well, in Seminar 5, we'll look at human brains in all their glory. The goal of the seminar will be to investigate and present the unique abilities of human brains that gave rise to the vibrant culture around us. I tried to pick one item that could represent such a culture, and I came up with switched-on buck. Not only is this album an example of classical music of great beauty, it's also an example of a technology achievement, the Moog synthesizer. Here, a marriage of technology and classic culture is extending, the beauty of music in one unique package. What kind of brain could produce this kind of object? Well, join us in Seminar 5 to find out. This is Steve Saltwick. I hope you enjoyed the seminar.